Okay, so you should be able to see my PowerPoint now. Great. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about working with people, which is essentially what all my work is about. And I'm going to talk for about 15 minutes on one topic. And then for the last 5 minutes, I've got three choices, which I thought I'd put to you as to where we go after that. So basically, the first question I like to start with is, when we talk about saving the world from climate change, what exactly are we trying to save? And sometimes people pose this question as if it's a choice between people and the planet, with the idea being, well, the planet will survive, it's people that, may not survive in these conditions. But I'm talking at a slightly different level here. I'm talking about when you think about what it is you really care about, what you really value, what you think makes this world truly alive, what is it in that you're trying to save? Are you trying to save corporate capitalism? Are you trying to save consumerism? Are you trying to save democracy? Are you trying to save elements of your culture? Are you trying to save your children? So I'm talking about all those different things in the way in which we as human beings respond to the world and care deeply about some aspects of it. So I've done a lot of work trying to talk about this question. So I'm just having a slight issue there, right? I've done a lot of work on this, and some of you may have actually been at other sessions and other contexts that I've run, and asked many, many people what it is that they think is sacred, precious, special, what is of value for its own sake, what it is that makes the world truly alive. These things can be in any dimension: emotions, relationships, part of the natural world, qualities or objects, and tried to get to a shared understanding of what it is we're trying to sustain when we talk about sustainability, what it is we want to make sure is still in the world when we think about our response to climate change. And it's a really important starting point, I think, because it is often left unsaid, and also because if we're able to establish a common values base, then I think that makes everything else possible. It makes conversation possible, it makes action planning possible, and so on. So in asking this question, I've asked it to literally thousands of people. 1,080 were part of a research project in which they provided three things that were of infinite value, according to this definition. And with help from others, we coded these things into a word cloud. And if you know how word clouds work, the bigger the word on the cloud, the more people said something that was represented by this word. And these words are all in English, which I think isn't ideal, but that is the word cloud that we have. And I'm going to show it to you now. So these are the things that over 1,000 people said was of deep value to them. And as you can see, love, aroha, right there in the center. Family, happiness, nature, friendship, the ocean, compassion, personal strengths, empathy, artistic expression, landscapes, communication, relationships, peace, hope, beauty, civil society, animals and plants, and so on. And as you're looking at that word cloud, I think it's worth just thinking for a minute about how you feel if you imagine that these are the kinds of things people really care about. And I'll get on to that question in a second. So if we look at these in terms of categories, what we've found in this project is that the most common thing people talk about when you ask them what they care about most is what we call relational values. So it's things to do with relationships between people. So it might be compassion, it might be culture, it might be family. Those kinds of words are the words that come up, might be my children. Another really key category is expressive values. So these are the things that every person strives for: art, music, learning, creativity, dance, happiness, joy, words associated with emotions and words associated with expression. And those top two quadrants are essentially in the human domain. People often mention the natural world. If we go back to that slide, you can see lots of examples. We've got the ocean, we've got water, we've got animals and plants, landscapes, healthy environments, and so on. These are usually less commonly mentioned, though. They're less top of mind for most people. And the fourth quadrant is something about the whole or complexity or spirituality, some kind of reflective notion, because we know as human beings, we have to hold all this stuff somehow. We have to consider it, balance it, have narratives that are ways of talking about it with each other. So that question that I posed to you, how do you feel when you see this word cloud? If you imagine that this is what people really care about, well, we asked people this in another research study, and 128 people participated in this, and they wrote down, they did a exercise asking them for their infinite values, those that from that definition were presented with the word cloud, and then asked how they feel. And these are the core themes that came through from 4 workshops, 128 people. A sense of belonging to a human community with shared values, a sense of feeling safe and reassured, and being uplifted and filled with hope. 2 more minor responses that came through were, who are these people? I don't trust this. You've just asked left-wing, eco-type people. You haven't gone out there and asked people in the core, the dark core of corporate capitalism, have you? And then a second more minor theme was, why am I failing to live up to these values? So we have a kind of cynicism. We can't necessarily believe this, and we know that we're not perfect in actually maintaining them. But what I want to suggest is that this is a tale of joy, and feeling that we're on the same page with other people in our values, a sense of belonging to a human community with shared values, and then being these things that are about beauty, generativity, the natural world, other people, and so on, is a tale of joy. And it's a tale of joy for 2 reasons. It makes us feel good, but really importantly, it invites us to step into the collective space. It says to people, the common good is worth working for. We're all here together in something really special. Do you want to play? It's a tale of joy. Now, psychologists can be really mean, and we do tricks essentially sometimes with people to try and figure out what's going on inside people without actually telling them necessarily exactly what we're looking for. And we did this in a study with our stage 1 students. So we have 560 students each semester, and they also, as well as being in one big lecture theatre, they also have tutorials in groups of about 20 to 30 students. So this year we did this, there were 20 different tutorial streams. So we randomly divided those into 2 groups, condition 1 and condition 2. Now the students, the first part of the exercise for all the students involved asking them what they thought was of infinite value, and they were in front of computers, so they were able to write up to 3 things into a computer program, and they wrote all the kinds of things, you know, family and friends was actually a really common thing for them to say, as well as other things. And then we said to the people in condition 1, the first group of 10 tutorials, we said to them, thank you for contributing those. And then on the computer screen, it said, we've asked 1,000 other people what their values are, and this is what they said. So we showed them the word cloud, and we asked them to respond how they felt seeing this. And they felt the same kind of trends we've seen in the other study. So feelings of shared values, really commonly, half the students actually said something about feeling similar to other people and recognizing the values on the cloud. Now to the second people in the second condition, the second group of students, we asked them for their infinite values, and then we said to them, we've asked 1,000 other people what their values were, and this is what they said. And so we showed them this word cloud. Now, I'm not going to go into how that word cloud was constructed, but I want you to think for a minute how you'd feel if you'd been asked what's precious and special, and then you were told that this, with money in the centre, possessions, houses, wealth, social position, status and power, all in bold letters, are what other people really care about. Well, these are some of the things the students said. Somehow that tale of terror has gone across it early. My 3 things of infinite value are easily identifiable. They're things I feel I couldn't live without. Maybe sad and disheartened to see greater goods placed on material good and money. My infinite values seem to be more genuine. I was very surprised to see the biggest word cloud was money. It makes me angry that these words were other people value. They seem superficial, materialistic, not nice values. I found it easy to think of 3 things of infinite value. There were more words I had in mind. I was shocked the words like love or family weren't in large letters. I'm not surprised money was there, but it did shock me it was the largest. Mine was slightly different from the 1,000 people. The infinite values for others were more realistic, included things like financial stability. I focused more on people and personal strengths. Feel slightly confused as none of my listed things were on the cloud of common things. Consider whether I'd interpreted the question wrong. And I put that one last because I think that's a common experience of many of us walking around the world. Have I interpreted the question wrong? It's like what we care for in our hearts and what we sense is the sort of pulse of human life and of our life together on this planet somehow is discordant with what we feel is being expressed around us. So I want to call that a tale of terror. And a tale of terror, as opposed to a tale of joy, makes us feel bad, so we get angry, shocked, sad, disheartened, confused, and also it splits us from other people. It actually means you're out for yourself, mate. This is your life. You do with it what you can, but other people aren't going to be there for you. And there's a ton of research, which I don't have time to go into today, but I've done some writing on this if you're interested in following up. A ton of research that shows to engage in actions for the common good, people need to trust that others hold their values and will be there for them. And essentially, they need to feel that they're part of a tale of joy. Anger is important for many social movements, but that trust, that sense that you're part of something, and that if we get this right, we strengthen the collective, is absolutely crucial to actions for the common good. So if we create a tale of joy, we invite people to participate in activities that promote the common good and address climate change. And it involves accessing values. There's many other ways to do it. I've got a free online manual if you're interested in other ways to get on this sort of values page, same values page. But the second thing I want to talk about briefly before giving you an opportunity to consider where we go after this is this idea of how systems change. And so all of this work that I'm doing, which is trying to find a shared kaupapa around these values and use networks to promote sustainability, as we might talk about later, works in the context of complexity theory. So what it assumes is that multiple things are happening in society at multiple levels all the time. And those of us who care, our task is actually to prepare the ground for change, not to bring about change. There's a difference, I think. Not because we wouldn't like to bring about change, but because that's not how the world works. Now, this graph that you can see here is in the United States. And what's interesting about it is that there's a very faint grey line, you may or may not be able to see this, that represents the 50 states in the United States. And these lines here are the number of states that passed a certain type of legislation. And when a line has a little orange, a little circle on it, this is when that particular legislation became federally mandated. So let's have a look at interracial marriage. So this was whether or not blacks and whites were allowed to get married to each other. And what you can see here at the beginning of the graph in 1787, so hopefully you can see that on your screen right at the beginning, a few states allowed interracial marriage, a long plateau, a few more states come on board until in just before 1950, a whole lot of states allowed it, and then we get in 1967 federally mandated. If you look at the purpley line near the end there, that starts in about 2005, that is marriage equality, so allowing same-sex marriage. What you can see there is only a few states, Massachusetts had that as a law, but then a whole heap of states within about a 5-year period made marriage equality laws. And now, this graph's slightly out of date, now it is federally mandated across the whole of the United States. And what's interesting about this graph is that say marriage equality. It's not like gay rights movement started in 2005. It's not like the people that pushed in Massachusetts for that legislation did it all by themselves, made it happen. We know that. We know there was so much, so many people coming out in public spaces, standing for office, making themselves vulnerable. All of that kind of stuff had to happen to prepare the ground for the policy change. So what I see us doing in the climate space at the moment, what I'm really hopeful about, is we continue to prepare the ground, doing all the things we're doing, succeeding, failing, all of that kind of stuff. And then change pops out of the system. And you can't make it happen, but it will pop out if enough of the culture starts to move in this kind of direction. So take-home message 2, systems change suddenly, but only because people worked towards that change and held the values or the kaupapa of that cause in multiple different ways. Change cannot be forced or predicted. So in practical terms, how do we hold the values kaupapa of a cause and attract other people to what we're doing? So these are the 3 ideas that if we have got 10 minutes left for this session, you could either ask questions or I could talk about one of these. So I'll just hand over to you to make a decision on that. The first idea here is that people are happiness seekers. And what's really crucial about that when we're talking about social change is that, so as evolved creatures, we have these emotional responses to the world. And essentially some emotions attract us to things. And these are things that feel right or feel good. Now I'm calling that happiness, but it's not necessarily, oh, you know, I'm so cheerful today. It's that sense of rightness. So when things are interesting, when people are nice to us, when we can think that something's got purpose, when it's going somewhere, all of those kinds of emotions associated with that attract us to a person, an action, an organization. So the really first lesson here is that if we want people to do this kind of work on climate change, it has to feel right to them. They have to be attracted to it. And one of the key ways to do that is through human warmth. Goes back to that relational values. So when we make people feel welcome, like they've come into a space and they absolutely belong and their ideas are gems and we want them, they'll be attracted to keep coming back. Now, fear, which is commonly used in the environmental movement, from a sort of evolved evolutionary biological perspective, that makes us want to run away and hide. That's the signal. So if we pump people full of the bad news, most people want to retreat. They want to get out of that situation. And they certainly don't want to hang around us anymore. So we have to be super careful about how often and how we use fear. Anger is an attack signal that says there's an injustice, there's something wrong, blow that thing up, you know, yell at them, change them, they're bad, that kind of signal. Now, anger is important in social movements, as I talked about a little bit before, but anger doesn't put something in place of what was. Also, research on social movements shows that while people who are angry often get involved, they have to have hope. So anger without hope doesn't get anywhere. Anger with hope allows you to step into a space, create that change we need. But further than this, research has shown again that people who are upbeat, positive, cheerful, interested, all of those kinds of things are also more cooperative. So one study involved going into businesses, and they asked people to identify some of their teams and the ones that seemed to do really well, that got things done, worked well together, all of that kind of stuff, and the teams that didn't do so well. And then the researchers watched these teams in action, and they found in the high performance teams, there were 5 positive to every 1 negative comment in the teams. In the medium performance teams, there were 2 positive comments to every 1 negative comment. In the low performance teams, there were 2 negative comments to every 1 positive comment. And so we all know what it's like to be in a low performance team, right? That's that time when nobody listens to you, nobody affirms your ideas, and it's all just this horrible mess. Now, what many researchers have suggested is you can't be relentlessly positive because you have to be realistic, but you can be at least 10, 12 times as positive as negative in these kinds of interactions. So that positivity is crucial to cooperation. Positivity also helps us be more creative. one of the things, if you think about your mind, or think about, kind of imagine that you can imagine your brain. And, you know, when you're really interested in something, you have a kind of alertness, you know, when you feel love, when you feel interest, when you feel engaged, it's like everything's kind of moving in you. And that sort of moving around of our neurons, that sort of activity that's going on there, helps us think of creative solutions. So if we go back to this idea that we're in a complex world in which change will come from lots of different places and can't be predicted, we absolutely have to have people thinking of creative local solutions. So all the work I do in sustainability networks, which is all about bottom-up generation of projects, we've got to get people's brains firing. And those kinds of positive emotions are really critical to that. So just to finish on that element, how do we work with people as happiness seekers? Attract them to us by human warmth, food, crucial, good kai, always works, by affirming them for their actions, by helping them be cooperative, and by inspiring hope and being really careful with fear and anger. You don't have to worry that they won't get the realistic picture, because believe me, the media out there is pumping the fear, pumping the anger. So you don't have to worry by being a kind of more positive person that they're not going to get the other side. Believe me, they will. So let's just briefly talk about the second component then, this idea that people are social. Now, there's a ton of research on the sociability of people. One study was done with babies. The youngest baby was 42 minutes old. Minutes? Would you like to be in a research study? Absolutely. Can't think of a better way to spend the first hour of my life. And what happened in the study was they had an adult performing facial gestures, and the baby, while the baby was alert and the baby was looking at the adult, and then another adult would guess what the baby was doing. And if the adult that was looking at the baby, you know, from the side, could guess the same thing as the other adult was doing with their face, that was a sign that the babies could imitate. And this study suggested 2/3 of babies were able to imitate in those very, very young days. Other research has suggested maybe this happens a little bit later, but whenever it kicks in exactly, as human beings, we are plagued with this question of how we be a person, and the most compelling answer is copying other people. Happens further up the developmental scale, happens as adults, we imitate each other, and it's called the chameleon effect. Chameleons change colour to blend with their surroundings, we change behaviour. So I don't really have time to do this any justice at all, but just to finish, in case it is a question, because I do want to allow a minute or two for that, what's really crucial too is that we follow what are called behavioural traces. So we look around physical environments and we try to figure out what people do around here. So if we see a space that's full of litter, we think, that's where I can drop my litter. And lots of studies on littering have shown that litter places get more littered because people think that's a normative behaviour. So one of the things, I'm just going to skip most of this, one of the things to just bring this together then is that we're looking around constantly trying to figure out how to be a person. And remember, we've got these imitating brains, we've got these tales of joy or these tales of terror. So when we tell a tale of terror about the environment, that everybody's hopeless, we're all driving our cars, we're all lazy, we're all useless, we're all selfish, I hear lots of those tales. So when we tell those kinds of tales to our imitating brains, we're also saying that's how you be a person. And even though it's a tale of terror, people can step into that story. When we do the opposite, when we try to draw attention to what people are doing that is positive, look at all these people creating change. Look at all these people sitting in a lecture theatre in Whangarei today talking about this stuff. When we look at all this amazing work young people, our rangatahi, are doing in this country, it's so inspiring. That's a tale of joy, and we can step into and live that tale. So if we think about people as imitators, the really key thing here is to continually draw attention to, highlight and support that's going in the direction we want it to, and draw more and more attention to it till that becomes a normative thing that we live into. So I'll stop there, and there might be a question in the last minute or two we have, and we can talk about networks some other time.
Niki, that was fabulous. Thank you very much. And yes, I think there's bound to be somebody in the room who has a burning question to ask you. I'm just looking around the room now for anybody who wants to ask a question. She's all the way over in Auckland, zooming in for us here. Anyone have a question around some of the psychology stuff? Tim, I'll give you the mic. Here we go.
Kia ora, Niki. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Value-based networks. What's your key go-to reminder for us if we're going to be working on that basis in that way of organising?
Yeah. Well, the key thing is that they need to come from the bottom up. So basically what you do is you get together groups of people either within an organisation or across organisations, and you establish that shared kaupapa from the beginning. So that's the really key thing, that we're on the same page with what we value. But then people within that network are either able to suggest or do different projects. So you're not forcing people to all get behind a single goal. So you might have, in the school project that I've run over the last 12 years, I haven't been sort of leading that for the last 2 years, we have waste-wise, so students doing waste projects, students doing travel projects, things like clothes swaps, a million different things, because the students are empowered to create projects anew. And what this does is this creates this culture of sustainability until more and more that organisation holds those values, and you get these creative solutions popping out from people who aren't even part of the network because they're starting to see this. So bottom-up projects, and the network reinforces those, highlights those, supports people, says and comes to the events that they run and all that kind of thing. That's it in a nutshell. I can't hear you, Catherine. That button.
Down the front. I think we have a couple of minutes. Here we go.
Why did you even start being sustainable and trying to get other people to do the same thing?
It's a great question. Why did I start? I started because there's so much about this world that I love, because I'm surrounded by people who are just full of joy and caring and life and vitality. And I love all the things that people can do. Like, I learned the guitar, I have a garden, I knit, I do ballet, and I love being with people who are trying to be creative and expressive and doing all this stuff. And I have such a clear sense of the amazing world we could live in if we brought ourselves together to do this stuff. So, and I also love the natural world. I mean, think of all the beautiful birds that we've got, and it's so sad to imagine that those species might die out. So to me, it's about life, really. Why am I doing it? Because I love life, the life around me and the life I can participate in, and all of this stuff to me is about keeping that going.
Well, that's all we've got time for, Niki. We're so grateful that you could zoom in and be with us here today, and all that information that you downloaded to us. We'll be reflecting on that, I'm sure, in the coming days, weeks, months. So everyone, Niki Harré, thank you very much.
Kia ora, Catherine. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Kia ora. Thank you.